You know that feeling when a new Monster Hunter game drops? The feeling of stepping into a brand new world, the thrill of facing new monsters, the excitement of what to craft next. Monster Hunter Wilds had me feeling all of that and more. From the moment I set foot in it, I don't know how the time flew. From the very first monster of Chatacabra to the last one, Tempered Arcveld, it felt like Capcom was giving us one of the most ambitious Monster Hunter experiences yet. And for the most part, they did. But as the hours stacked up, as I was reaching Hunter rank 80 and then 90, something started nagging at me. Although I missed my Palamute from Monster Hunter Rise and the cheerful and dorky Palico chefs from the previous Monster Hunter titles during my experience, the lack of many Monster Hunter aspects and the lack of legacy monsters started to feel. I was desperately looking for a gathering hub, and I found myself getting fed with Monster Hunter Wilds' colorless areas. Why did it seem like we were missing features that have been staples for years? Don't get me wrong, Wilds is just fantastic, but I can't shake the feeling that it should have been so much more at launch. And I can't just help but compare it with Monster Hunter World, Rise and Generations Ultimate, and what Wilds could have offered more to make itself a perfection for everyone. I'm Arcadenaut here, and today we are gonna focus on some missing key aspects or the weak points of Monster Hunter Wilds. It could have had the strongest Monster Hunter launch ever, but here I am, seeing every player using the same armor and the same weapon types called Artian Weapons. Today will be about what Wilds lacks and why, despite how much I love it, it's impossible to ignore what's missing. The reason why I wanted to make a constructive critique is due to Monster Hunter Wilds is real fun and captivating. One of the biggest and most welcome additions to Monster Hunter Wilds is the focus mode system. Monster Hunter has always been a game of commitment with every swing. Every dodge or every decision could shape the hunt's outcome, with the focus mode allowing for more precise targeting and better control over the weapon movements. Monster Hunter Wilds marked its style of innovation. For greatsword mains like me, it allows for better charge attack control. For dual blade, it enhances the ability to stick to a monster's weak points, or maybe for bow and bowgun players, focus mode offers even finer aiming. Instead of slowing down the pace, you are still on your toes, dodging, countering and reacting with an extra level of control that makes the combat feel more dynamic. As this addition to the core gameplay helps the newcomers to overcome the learning curve of Monster Hunter, namely the weapon commitment, the attack delays and the monster unpredictability easier than before, it also helps the series to reach new audiences. At this point, you may realize that my issue with Monster Hunter Wilds is not about the gameplay or the changes that it brought to its core mechanics, but with its concept and content. I can't shake the feeling that the post-launch development and the communication of Monster Hunter team would be similar to Street Fighter 6's, meaning that we might only have 4 additional monsters in 1 year with a minimal amount of communication from the developers. And maybe 2 new quests a week that just rewards layered armors that can be obtainable only in 30 minutes or to 1 hour. I guess my issues are what feels incomplete at launch and a reflection on how it compares to its predecessors. For me, Monster Hunter isn't just about hunting, and that is what makes it so unique and so successful when it's compared to its competitors like God Eater, Tokiden or even the latest Wild Hearts. Monster Hunter is also about its atmosphere, its own cheerful, colorful yet serious personality, and also those little moments of levity that break up the intense battles. Unfortunately, Wild seems to have sacrificed much of the franchise's charm while in pursuit of a more serious tone. Although Monster Hunter World's narrative and concept are also serious with its new and unknown world, it never had the intention to sacrifice its core conceptual aspects, delivering what the fans of the series love, whether it be the hub, the legacy monsters, or the cooking palicos. I tried my best to focus on Wilds' content and what it offers instead. However, as I was hunting, my mind often wandered off, asking where the silly palico antics were, or if I would ever have my own squad of palicos surveying the land and collecting items. No hubs to relax or wander around, no palico babushkas cooking before a hunt. Sadly, all of this whimsical nature of the series had been toned down. While that may appeal to some, it removes a key element that made Monster Hunter unique, and with the lack of main hunt content and the legacy monsters becoming so obvious, my heart started to fill with an ache, reminding me of my adventures in previous Monster Hunter titles. Although one of my biggest concerns surrounding Monster Hunter Wilds is the absence of features that have been staples in previous entries, the lack of legacy monsters is quite obvious. Comparing the base versions only, not including Iceborne or Sunbreak expansions, Monster Hunter Wilds launches with fewer monsters than Monster Hunter World and Rise. While Wilds seems to have arguably bigger hunts, the lack of variety is pretty obvious, and just as Capcom announced during the State of Play presentation, they want us to expect more monsters in post-launch updates, which is, when you think about it, a good thing. However, when I think about the lack of communication that Capcom developers show with Street Fighter 6, I just can't help but feel concerned about Monster Hunter Wilds. Basically, for Wilds to truly feel like a complete Monster Hunter experience, it needs more legacy monsters that add variety and challenge in the high rank. Right now, the roster feels underwhelming compared to World and Rise, and while Mizutsune has already been teased as the post-launch monster, I strongly feel like Capcom needs to ramp up the pace. I like Mizutsune, it's definitely in my top 10 monsters list, but it definitely deserves to be in the main game along with Zinogre, rather than a post-launch monster that we need to wait months for. Not only that, but also the game's Guardian monster concept is the perfect way to reintroduce classic monsters while also giving them a unique twist. These monsters, which are essentially artificial life created by an ancient civilization, have all strengths of the monsters they mimic, but also exclusive Guardian abilities. This means that this Guardian monster variety shouldn't have been limited to Doshaguma, Ratalos, Fulguranjanat, and Ebony Odagaran, but could have been expanded to include fan favorites such as Tigrex, Narkakuga, Zantrios, Chameleos, and Rajank. All of these monsters, with the gears and weapons they bring, they need to be featured in Monster Hunter Wilds as soon as possible. I'm not gonna talk about the leaks here and spoil the expectations of too many here, but I prefer Capcom to have a solid foundation at first and then include not so popular, or rather hidden gem monsters or maybe variants as the title updates. Mizutsune is definitely a good choice as the first title update, but given that the endgame players have already been farming tempered versions of Gormagala and Arkwelt, this made me question how Mizutsune's addition would add something fresh to Monster Hunter Wilds experience. If I were to talk for myself, it would add for me, for sure, without a question, but for newcomers, I am not so optimistic. In addition to all this Guardian monster concept, my logic just can't accept why Capcom added normal Ratalos to the roster but totally ignored the existence of Fulguranjanat and Ebony Odagaran and stuck only with their Guardian versions for the roster. Right now, we barely know anything about why the people of Wyveria created these Guardian monsters, and it definitely needs deeper exploration. It might be explored in the first expansion, that's for sure. However, my concern is how the endgame content of Monster Hunter Wilds is poorly directed. How poorly it was planned in terms of monsters, as well as in terms of weapon and gear variety as well. Bringing back fan favorite monsters as the endgame content would add a new challenge, while their Guardian form could add a new difficulty and a new twist to keep the players occupied, which would leave Capcom to plan maybe something bigger, maybe a more sinister monster as the title update. Monster Hunter franchise has 227 monsters in total, without the new additions of Monster Hunter Wilds. That means Capcom has no excuses to add new faces. Even monsters like Malfaisto, Kezu and Najarala needed to be added to Wilds so that the bigger threats like Devil Joe, Rajang or an Elder Dragon like Kirin could also take place in a richer environment. Monster Hunter has always been about the grind, starting with the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of farming materials, and the journey toward crafting that perfect weapon or armor set. Every monster you defeat brings you one step closer to a more powerful build, and this gradual progression is the backbone of the series. I do not have any issues with Monster Hunter Wilds giving more materials and speeding up this grinding process, but I have a big problem with the new Artian Weapons that fundamentally undermine this core gameplay loop. I love trying out different weapon types and I'm addicted to crafting different variants of weapons, picking my loadout according to weakness of the monsters. Crafting maybe my 6th or 7th greatsword just for the elemental damage. However, in every lobby, every endgame character has an Artian weapon equipped, with Gormagala and Arcweld armor supporting that build. And I try my best to ignore that path, making my endgame hunts more difficult than it should be. At first glance, Artian weapons seem like an interesting concept, much like similar to the Rise's Kamura weapons. Starting with the investigations occurring in each map and collecting weapon parts, you get to craft your own weapons without using monster materials and customize the weapon's damage, affinity and elemental properties according to the parts you make that weapon with. This system gives players full control over their build, allowing you to craft weapons of Rarity 8, doing the investigations that give you Rarity 8 weapon parts. However, this Artian weapon system and the way they are implemented completely bypasses the traditional grind-based weapon progression that Monster Hunter has always been known for. Instead of hunting specific monsters to forge and upgrade weapons, Artian weapons only require generic weapon shots, which are blades, discs and tubes, and the unfortunate thing is that you might already have enough weapon parts to craft your next endgame weapon. Basically, you can just fight the same few tempered monsters repeatedly and create an endgame weapon without ever needing to engage with the traditional progression system. When you think about it, I might sound like as if I am stuck in traditional gameplay mechanics, however, the situation is worse than it seems. And of course you can just experiment and tinker with different weapons and oppose the meta just like I do. However, these Artian weapons can be upgraded 5 times and definitely surpass each and every elemental or raw weapon tree, making these the endgame content for now. Upgrading these weapons cost a lot of materials, but if you just aim for 7 and 8 star quests and gather weapon parts and monster materials, then you will realize how fast you actually consume Monster Hunter Wilds' endgame content and have nothing left to do. Let's say you want to have the best fire-based greatsword, right? That would leave you between 2 to 3 choices. One of them is Rathalos' greatsword with the highest elemental damage, or maybe Guardian Rathalos with a mix of affinity and element. However, with these Artian weapons that I mentioned, you might have more elemental damage and more affinity when compared to the traditional weapon tree system. And sadly, by acquiring these weapons, there is no longer a sense of purpose behind each hunt, and I hope the first title update completely surpasses the purpose of these Artian weapons by providing rank 9 weapons so that the players would find themselves improving by each hunt, tinkering with what Wilds offers, rather than being stuck in the meta. What's even worse is that the tempered monsters don't drop unique materials. You do tempered monsters to receive hunter symbol for Rarity 8 weapons, but By trying to collect these symbols, you actually also gather enough parts to craft Artian Weapons. So, instead of chasing after rare materials like Raytalos Ruby, which is way easier to obtain due to the investigations when compared to the previous titles, all you are doing is grinding for weapon shards, which feels more like a loot system from an MMO. Maybe this weapon shard system should have a weekly limit if Monster Hunter Wilds tries to be a new kind of MMO rather than scattering these items around. Then the whole Artian weapon system could have a better purpose, or at least give players a sense of planning what to do due to these items being weekly limited to a certain amount. Just by joining some SOS flares and doing a couple of tempered Gormagala and tempered Arcweld hunts should give you the right amount to craft a rarity 8 Artian weapon. The rest is up to your luck and how the upgrade attributes would work in your favor. I want to be excited for the future of Monster Hunter Wilds, and in many ways, I still am. The new combat mechanics, a more open world approach than Monster Hunter World, but at the same time, it's hard to ignore the growing concerns over. It just doesn't feel like a complete sequel to Monster Hunter World. And I know Capcom will add a new challenge and a player hub in early April, but my point is, Monster Hunter Wilds feels quite unfinished when it reaches its endgame content. And I want to remind you that I didn't talk about the traditional side mission system not being here, where you get to see what the handler has in its arsenal for you to do, or where you capture monsters to unlock arena battle just like we did in Worlds, or Monster Hunter World having bigger and more impactful turf wars. My biggest concern is how Capcom will solve these issues rather than just launching their expansion maybe a year or two later, addressing these by then. I guess I'm okay with Wilds improving once a month or two, but I get this feeling that we might have to wait for 3 or maybe 4 months to have a seasonal title update, just like a new DLC character for Seafighter 6. If Wilds have delivered a strong experience at launch, then these updates would simply be bonuses, and I would have done a video saying how Wilds is the pinnacle of this series. However, currently, I find it weaker than World and Rise. And I don't like this. We shouldn't have to hear, oh, the Gathering Hub is coming later, or oh, we'll add more difficulty later kind of approach. And my point is, if Capcom had issues with their development schedule, they should address the lacking content as soon as possible. However, announcing Mizutsune before Wilds' launch just made me think that first year's title update monsters are already ready to be launched. I felt like Capcom is just taking its sweet time, keeping these monsters when the player base starts to drop after 2 or 3 months, while they keep cooking for the expansion. Monster Hunter Wilds could become the best Monster Hunter game ever, but only if Capcom keeps Wilds and its monster roster fresh. If not, then Monster Hunter Wilds would start to reach its true potential with its first expansion and then grow bigger with each title update of that expansion until a new Monster Hunter title is announced. I just want my boy Zinogre in Monster Hunter Wilds. I want his fight to be challenging, and I want that challenge to be worthy of doing it. And see Capcom communicating with its fans about Wilds' roadmap and which monster they would bring in the future. Because if I were to speak for myself, I already found myself going back to Monster Hunter World, trying to figure out which weapon I should go for before Mizutsune arrives in Monster Hunter Wilds. As always, thank you for watching today's video. Which monster would you like to see in Monster Hunter Wilds? Any humble support through Patreon and YouTube join is really appreciated, and I will see you soon in my next video.